The night I walked into that room, I wasn't supposed to be there. Garrett had told me the Denver Real Estate Collective dinner was a client thing. Low-key. Not worth my time. And I had nodded and said okay, the way I had been saying okay for longer than I want to count. But Cassidy had forwarded me something that afternoon. 3 words, in the subject line. No explanation needed. And by 6:15, I was standing at the valet with my coat still buttoned, telling myself I just needed to see it with my own eyes. The ballroom held maybe 80 people. The kind of crowd where everyone knows someone and nobody looks directly at anyone they're not sure about yet. Cocktail hour was already moving. Glasses catching the light. Low music under the noise of networking voices, doing their careful work. I took a drink from a passing tray without stopping and let myself move into the room slowly. The way you do when you're not looking for anything in particular. Even when you are. I saw him before he saw me. Garrett was standing near the far windows with a group of 4. Jacket open. One hand in his pocket. And I knew that posture. Knew exactly how relaxed it was supposed to look. The woman beside him was Petra Winslow, junior broker at his firm. Someone I had met exactly once at a Christmas party 18 months ago. She was laughing at something, her shoulder turned toward him, and his hand was resting at the small of her back, the way a man's hand rests when it already knows the geography. That was the thing that settled it for me. Not the anger I expected, but something quieter and much more certain. His hand wasn't nervous, wasn't accidental. It was comfortable. And comfortable takes time. Then he looked up and found my face across the room, and for exactly 1 second, Garrett Caldwell had no expression at all. Then the smile came back, easy and practiced, and he moved toward me and said, "Hey, I thought you weren't coming." And I looked at him and said, "I wasn't." Then I changed my mind. What I want you to understand is that none of this started with that ballroom. It started 4 months earlier, on a Tuesday night when Cassidy was sitting at my kitchen counter with a look on her face that meant she was deciding how to say something she knew I wasn't going to want to hear. She had pulled up the investment-linked account on her laptop, the one I mostly let Garrett manage, because he was the one in real estate. Or so I had let myself believe. She pointed at a recurring transfer of $2,400 a month to something called Ridgemont Capital Holdings, LLC, and asked me how long it had been running. I told her I assumed it was a new investment vehicle, something Garrett had mentioned in passing. Cassidy set her wine down and said, "Raina, I process asset disclosures for divorce cases every week. This is not an investment structure. This is a transfer pattern." I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was panicking, but because something I had been filing under suspicion for months had just been handed a name. And named things are harder to put back on the shelf. I went into the email account Garrett didn't know I still had access to, and I started reading. Not frantically, but methodically. The way you move through something when you already suspect what you're going to find. What I found wasn't love letters. It was a timeline. A forwarded thread between Garrett and Petra's personal email, laying out dates with the kind of precision that only comes from planning done well in advance. A target date for completing the LLC transfers. A window for when he intended to tell me. A note, in his own words, about wanting the asset restructure finished before anything became, and I am using his exact phrasing here, legally complicated. He wasn't leaving me because the marriage had failed. He was managing the exit the way he managed a property deal, minimizing liability, protecting his position, making sure that by the time I understood what was happening, the most important decisions had already been made without me. Petra's replies were brief and practical. No sentiment, no hesitation, just confirmation and logistics. She knew about me from the beginning, referenced me by name in the third message, not with guilt, but with scheduling awareness, noting that a particular weekend worked because I would be traveling for a client presentation. 14 months of a plan that had my name on the losing side of it. I called Cassidy, and she connected me with a family law attorney named Patricia Osei, whose office was 20 minutes from my apartment. I went in on a Wednesday morning, laid out everything I had, and Patricia looked at the transfer records and the email thread and said what I had brought her was, using her exact words, a very good start. I kept going after that. I documented carefully, moved nothing, changed nothing, and waited for the right moment to stop being the person in this situation who didn't know. Garrett steered us toward a cluster of people near the center of the room, his hand briefly at my elbow, and I let him because I was not ready to move yet, and he didn't know that. The group included Leon Braddock, Garrett's closest contact at the firm for 6 years, who gave me a smile that landed slightly too careful. The smile of someone who has been briefed. Petra was still with them, and when Garrett said, "You know Raina?" My wife. She looked directly at me and said, "Of course. We've met at the office Christmas party," with the kind of smoothness that only comes from having rehearsed the version of yourself you plan to present. I looked at her and smiled back and said, "Right. The Christmas party. You were talking to Garrett most of the night. Not as an accusation. Just a fact I was returning to its rightful owner." And something shifted in her expression for exactly half a second before she reset it. Leon looked at his drink at that exact moment, and that small movement confirmed what I had already suspected about how much he knew and how long he had been choosing to say nothing. Felix Okafor had been hired to shoot the event, and he was good at his job, moving through the room quietly, finding angles without announcing himself. He recognized Garrett from a previous booking and stepped into our group the way photographers do at industry events. Easy and familiar, and mentioned the headshots from last month. Asked if Garrett had gotten a chance to look through the selects. Said the studio on Larimer had good light that afternoon. It was a completely ordinary sentence. Garrett started to answer and then stopped. Not dramatically. Just a half beat too late. The kind of pause that happens when someone's mouth gets ahead of their awareness. That afternoon had been a Thursday in October, and I knew exactly where Garrett had told me he was, because I had called him twice, and he had picked up both times with highway noise in the background, telling me he was 40 minutes outside Houston. The studio on Larimer Street is 12 minutes from our house. I looked at Felix and kept my voice completely level and asked, "Where was that?" Again? Felix gave me the address without hesitation, because he had no reason not to. And I nodded, then looked at Garrett. He started to explain, and I said, "You don't have to," quietly enough that only the people closest to us could hear it. I reached into my bag, took out my phone, and set it on the high-top table beside me. Screen up. Without pushing it toward anyone. I had pulled up the email thread before I walked into the building, already open to the message where Petra had written that the Thursday window worked because I would be traveling. His name was in the header. Her name was in the header. The date was right there. Garrett's voice came out lower than before, controlled in the specific way of someone who is recalculating in real time. "Raina, this is not the place for this." I looked at him with the steadiness that 4 months of preparation will give you and said, "You chose the place. You just didn't expect me to show up in it." Petra had gone very still beside him, and what I noticed was that she did not look surprised. She looked caught, which is a different thing entirely. Donna Wyrick was moving toward us from across the room, reading something in Garrett's posture that had activated whatever protective instinct she ran on, and I watched her come without moving. Donna's first move was to touch my arm lightly and suggest we find somewhere quieter. A side room. A hallway. Anywhere that wasn't here. I looked at her and said, "I'm fine right here." Not unkindly. Just clearly. And something in her expression recalibrated because she had expected the offer to work the way it always worked. It did not work this time. I turned back to Garrett and spoke at the normal register of a conversation between two people who are no longer pretending. I told him I knew about Ridgemont Capital Holdings, the transfer schedule, the amounts, the timeline his attorney had helped him structure over the previous 8 months. I told him the separation date had been selected specifically to fall after the final transfer cleared, so that by the time the marriage was legally dissolving, the asset picture would look considerably different from what it actually was. Garrett said it was more complicated than I was making it sound. I said, I know exactly how complicated it is. That's the point. Cassidy stepped up beside me then, not saying anything, just present. And that single movement shifted the visible geometry of the group in a way that everyone registered. Leon had fully separated himself from the cluster. The posture of a man who has decided he wants his name in the footnotes rather than the headline. I looked at him directly and said, "You knew," and he did not deny it. I just held my gaze for a moment and then looked away, which was its own kind of answer. Garrett had no audience left to perform for. The people still standing within earshot were the same people he had spent years building his professional reputation in front of, and every one of them had just watched him run out of responses. He tried one more time. A sentence about this being a private matter handled in the wrong setting. And I said, "My attorney already has everything. I just needed tonight so you'd stop pretending I didn't." He went quiet. Not the calculated quiet of someone choosing their next move, but the kind that comes when the moves are gone. Petra set her glass down on the nearest surface and did not pick it up again. She did not look at Garrett, and that absence of eye contact between them, after 14 months of coordinated effort, said more clearly than anything else that the partnership had just become a liability. I looked at her with something that was not hostility and not forgiveness, just the plain acknowledgement of someone who has seen the full shape of a thing. "I hope it was worth the planning," I said, and I turned and walked toward the exit at the same pace I had walked in. Garrett's attorney contacted Patricia's office 8 days after the dinner, and the tone of that first communication told Patricia everything she needed to know about how much they had expected the asset structure to go unnoticed. The Ridgemont Capital Holdings transfers were flagged immediately in discovery, and because I had documented the timeline before anything had been dissolved or reclassified, the picture that emerged in the filings was accurate in a way that Garrett's original plan had depended on preventing. The process was not fast and it was not painless, but it moved on ground that I had chosen, not ground that had been prepared for me without my knowledge. Petra left the brokerage firm 3 weeks after the dinner. The firm's policy on relationships between brokers and junior staff they supervised was not ambiguous, and the investigation did not take long to reach a conclusion. She was not in Denver by the time the paperwork finalized. I did not track where she went because I did not need to, and the fact that I did not need to was itself a kind of resolution I had not expected to feel so cleanly. Leon sent me a text message 6 weeks later, an apology honest enough to acknowledge what he had actually done, which was know and say nothing for longer than he could justify. I read it once and thought about the night he looked at his drink instead of looking at me, then set my phone face down on the counter and did not reply. That was not cruelty. It was the accurate response to someone who had been a bystander by choice. Donna did not reach out, and the absence of contact was its own kind of statement, one I accepted without spending time on it. Cassidy and I had lunch on a Thursday 3 weeks after the filing, at a place we used to go before Garrett's family events had rearranged most of my ordinary habits. And we sat there for 2 hours talking about things that had nothing to do with any of this, which was the best possible sign. Felix posted one photograph from the event on his Instagram. No caption beyond "good energy in the room that night." And in it, I am standing near the high-top table, phone in hand, looking straight ahead at something outside the frame. I saw it the morning he posted it and felt something I had not felt in a long time. Not triumph. Not relief exactly. Just the simple recognition of myself in a photograph, standing like someone who knew where she was and why. The apartment I moved into is smaller than the house we shared, and my name is the only name on the lease. I set up my desk near the window that faces east, and the light comes in early, and I open my laptop and work on campaigns that belong entirely to me, not to a version of me that had been slowly edited down to fit inside someone else's plan. What I know now that I did not know 2 years ago is that a plan designed to erase you depends entirely on you not finding out until it is finished. The only thing that interrupted Garrett's timeline was that I stopped assuming good faith and started paying attention to what was actually in front of me. The documents were real. The transfers were real. The email thread was real. And none of it required interpretation once I was willing to look at it directly. I am grateful to still be standing on ground I chose. That is the most honest way I know to say it. If you stayed with this story all the way to here, I want you to know that it has pieces of my own life inside it. The particular weight of realizing you have been managed rather than loved. And the specific quiet of a morning when that is finally fully over. If any part of this reached you, leave a comment. I read them, and I mean that. And I am glad you are here.